take a lot of other courses before I'd ever get in the studio. And somebody, and I don't have any idea who, mentioned, well, San Diego City College has got this brand new program, this brand new beautiful studio, and their cameras and everything that are just as good as they have out at State, maybe even better. And so I checked into it and got enrolled in City College, and that had to be early in 1973.
How did you decide you wanted to be on TV?
Well, it's interesting. I was actually managing a little hotel over on Maui called Napili Village and having a really good time. But I was 20 years old and retired. I was living a great life. I wasn't making any money, having fun, but I knew that I couldn't live like this forever. I had to make something of myself. I had to go back to school and get a degree, and I love sports. First time I tried college back in the 60s, mid-60s, I was a lousy student. I went to chase ladies and play football and basketball, and did that and had a lot of fun. And football actually kept me out of Vietnam in 1968. Blew out a knee playing football. I didn't have to worry about the draft anymore, and that's how I got to Hawaii. I moved there kind of on a whim. I heard there was some money to be made, so I moved over to Hawaii and had fun. But again, I was in the hotel business having this good time and living the life of Riley, but knowing I had to go back to school. So I thought I'd become a sportscaster. I love sports. It really was the only interest I had at that time. And I figured, okay, where's a great place to live over in the mainland? It's kind of like Hawaii, and it offers a pretty good TV program. And I had heard a lot about San Diego State, and that's how I ended up here. But again, San Diego State was going to be kind of tough to get started in. I already had a lot of the general education classes under my belt from my previous experience up at Merced College. And I really wanted to get right into a studio, and I wanted to start doing the news and sports. And so City College was a dream come true. It really was. It fulfilled everything I needed. Brand new program. We had, in fact, our classes that we started in 73, 74, we started doing the very first news that City College did. I can remember Dear Hope Shaw coming in and announcing that we were going to do the news. We were going to tape a half-hour newscast and put it on something called cable, which was brand new, for Coronado. And so we did. We write a newscast, and I actually got to direct it that first semester. And we spent 3 hours, 4 hours taping it, and it wasn't live. We'd tape it, shut down, start over. There were technical difficulties, and we didn't have teleprompters, and so things were pretty rough, pretty crude, pretty primitive. But we'd get through it, and we'd have to edit it all together and time it all out and make sure that it fit the window it had to fit in. And quite literally, many times on that Friday, we'd get done 20, 30 minutes before the thing was supposed to air. I'd have to run out to my car, take off for Coronado, call the guy before I left the studio, because in those days, no cell phones, tell him I was on my way, not to panic, I'd be there. Of course, in those days, you also had to pay a toll across the bridge. Zip into Coronado, and if you speed in Coronado, you get a ticket, so you'd have to get on the brakes as soon as you hit Coronado and drive down Orange Avenue, and it was over there by the old theater, right there on Orange out towards the Hotel Del, and the guy would literally be standing out on the sidewalk, 4 or 5 minutes to go before airtime. I'd throw this giant 2-inch tape that was about that thick and weighed about 50 pounds out the window. He'd catch it, run in, put it on, and that was our first newscast. And we did that for a couple of semesters, and I think even after I left, they were still doing it for Coronado, and they, I'm sure, much more sophisticated now, and probably do even a live newscast, something we wouldn't even attempt to do in those days. But it got our feet wet. Man, everybody in the department got to do something. I directed, I produced, I anchored news, I anchored sports. Out of that crew, that year, those 2 semesters, so many people got jobs locally. I came over here as an intern a year later and ended up getting hired. That's a whole other story. But Mike Torres was in that class with me, and he's our head director here and has been here for 35 years. A lot of people from that group went on to get into the business, and they're still around.
How did you start it in San Diego? I mean, everybody says you
Well, it's funny. I came over as an intern because you want to get your foot in the door somewhere. And I can remember the news director, a guy named Bill Pearson, almost the first thing out of his mouth when he interviewed me for an internship was, "You're never going to work for me. You're never going to work in this station. You got to go to a small market. We're gonna teach you how to do the business. We're gonna help you put a tape together, and then you're gonna have to go to Alabama or Mississippi or Texas or somewhere and get your first job." Well, 6 months later, they needed somebody to do a little rip and read newscast in the morning called Sign On News. It was taped. I got to do that. He left and took a job at another station, and the news director that took his place, well, he ended up hiring me full time within that next year. A real funny thing too, because interns in those days, you were a gopher. You went and got coffee, you ripped in the wire copy, you cut through newspapers looking for story ideas. You did whatever needed to be done, but it was really menial, lousy jobs. I hated it. It lasted about 2 weeks. The gal that ran the internship program, who was the news director's secretary named Cindy, she went on, by the way, to become the first female photojournalist in town. On her own time, she decided she didn't want to be a secretary anymore, so she became a camera person. Bless her heart. Anyway, I couldn't take her. I couldn't take what was going on, so a buddy of mine who was coming in early in the morning said, "Hey, look, if you come in at 5:30, you can write for the morning cut-ins." We had those 5-minute newscasts as part of Good Morning America in those days. That was before we switched networks and became NBC. And so I did. I started coming in, loved to write. The producer, who was writing the show at that time, these little cut-ins, hated getting up, and after a couple of months, I took over the writing, and he wouldn't show up until just before the news director arrived. Dave Owen, who was the anchor man in those days, was confident that I knew what I was doing. He really was a great teacher. Dave Owen was his name, and we lost him a few years ago. But Dave was a great mentor, always preached accuracy, accuracy, accuracy. And he got to the point where he taught me enough. I'd come in at 5:30, and again, folks, no computers in those days. We had these teletype machines and all of these wires and all this wire copy stuff that we had to rip and tear to pieces and pull out stories. And I'd spend a half hour doing that every morning, and another 15 minutes usually changing the ribbons in these machines and making sure that they were working for the day. But I'd come in and write the copy for David, and he'd come in and sit down literally about 2 minutes before the newscast and kind of smooth out his hair and start reading whatever I wrote. One morning he calls up at about 5 minutes before 7:25, I guess would be the first one in those days, and said, "Hey, I fell back asleep." So I get on the phone and call the news director. I said, "What are we going to do? There's no anchor man." He says, "You do it." So with my stomach in my throat, I actually got my break, went on the air that first time. It was really interesting, too. My mom happened to be visiting. She lived up in Northern California, and she was here in town that morning. So I got to call and say, "Hey, I'm going to be on the air." And it was really exciting and very nerve-wracking, but I got through it, stumbled a few times, certainly. There were no teleprompters again in those days. And a couple of weeks later, they made a change, and I got to do that. That was my job then. It's not that I had my own writer and producer, no. They saved money that way. I got to still come in at 5 o'clock and do everything. I'd write my own copy. And when we finally did get a teleprompter, I even ran the teleprompter for myself, sitting at the news desk. But that's how you get the breaks, and I was very lucky.
Straight out of City College.
Yep.
Is there anything you remember, anything that stuck to you up to this day that, that they taught you at City College?
Well, the city was remarkable. First of all, it was kind of like this TV station, because in those days, yeah, we were an affiliate, but we were the new guys on the block. Channel 8 was KFMB. Channel 10, again, early on was ABC, but they switched no, I'm sorry, they were NBC, and then they switched to ABC. Those were the two big dogs in town. Channel 6 was a bit of a joke in those days, and you can tell stories about Channel 6 and how they started their news operation, having to drive south of the border and climb this mountain and go to their studio back in the old days to do news down there. But the only real players in town were Channel 8 and Channel 10, and we were the new guys in the block. And so we tried harder. At City College, it was the same kind of attitude. It was a new program, and Hope Shaw, bless her heart, she was just a remarkable lady. She took this department under her wing along with Jim Dark, who I think was actually the department head was still there at City College before he got involved in politics and kind of took over the whole City College or community college district here in San Diego. But Hope really was the heart and soul of that C building over there. And she'd share her expertise. She had this love of jazz, and of course, the jazz station over there, the radio side, that was Hope from beginning to end. And she just kind of, said, get out there, do your best, wing it. She had experience. She actually worked at Channel 10 at one time, years before. And we had a lot of people, ex-television people. Jim Dart had some TV experience. And these guys were the teachers. They were hands-on, and they'd tell you just enough to kind of whet your appetite, send you off in front of the camera, and you learned that way. C building was a trip. Yeah, it was all very amateurish in the beginning, but it was taking those first steps, those baby steps, and learning. Every day you'd come in and you'd take on a project and you'd learn how to produce a newscast and write it and deliver it and edit things, and it was awesome. And those poor people over at San Diego State, they spent 4 and 5 years, and at the end of that 5th year, they would probably get to have as much experience, some of them, as almost all of us involved in the program in 1 year at City College. It was just a tremendous advantage. And again, so many of us would go from City College right into the business. Maybe not here in San Diego, but somewhere. Get a tape together, and because you could do anything. If you had the initiative to work hard, and I can remember I ran the 2-inch tape machine during taping for a couple of things. So I learned how to do everything hands-on, just from the C building. So when I came over here, I had a lot of that expertise already. And I went to school. I was continuing to go to school and interning here, and it just melted. It was just a great merger of experience, and it paid off. I've been here, well, most of the last, 35 years, 34 years?
Whitney, is there anything important, related to your career and going from, jumping from City College, from being an intern to having your job? Is there anything else I didn't ask you? Anything you'd like to add?
Well, it's just I can remember being a student at City, and we didn't get anybody from TV actively come talk to us. I think we got a director once, and that was kind of cool. They'd come into your classroom, we'd sit there and have Q&A. But we had this a couple of disc jockeys who had started there at the station, and had gone on and gotten jobs here in San Diego, and became pretty well known. There was this one guy, and I can't think of his name anymore, from KGB, and of course in those days KGB was top man. It was the rocker in town. And it was just exciting to sit there in the classroom thinking, okay, I can do that someday. Someday with the right breaks, if I work hard enough, I can be there. You try to make yourself believe that as a student. And starting out as an intern here, I still had my doubts. Everyone has self-doubt when you get going. But I can remember a news director years ago, Tom Mitchell, bless his heart. He's still around town. He's out of the business finally after about 40 years. But Tom, again, told me when he gave me that job and replaced Dave Bowen, he says, just remember, Whitney, every year that goes by, you're going to realize how little you know about the business and how much more you learned this past year. It doesn't matter how long you're in the business, you're going to continually learn. And especially these days with things changing so much. Bottom line is, don't let your self-doubts take over. Get out there, try it. Start in your small markets. Send your resume tapes out. Bust your butts doing whatever you have to do and learn absolutely everything there is to learn while you have the opportunity to get your hands on and get involved in all aspects of the business there at City. You never know where you're going to end up, how that's going to pay off down the road, but whatever experience you get there will pay dividends eventually.
Great.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right. And you talk about opportunities. Sometimes your goals take a rather strange route before you finally achieve what you want to achieve. I wanted to become a sportscaster. Well, I didn't get to do that for a long time. The first job available, in fact, was in shipping and receiving and running the teleprompter and writing that early morning news. And you take whatever you can get to get your foot in the door. So I did news. That was my first job, and I ended up doing nothing but news for a long time, 13 years. I was an anchorman and a reporter. And then I finally got an opportunity to switch over and do sports. The sports director retired. They had a big shake-up there. I got into sports, and you know something? After being around the business for a while and covering some sports stories now and then, I realized I didn't like doing sports. Most professional athletes, you know, they're okay, but there aren't enough Tony Gwynns or Tim Flannerys out there. And I did not enjoy working the night hours and having to hang around at the stadium all night covering the Padres, who just stunk the place up in those days. So I didn't like sports. And I did it for about 3-4 years, and then I got into the business. I got fired, and that almost happens to everybody else in this business too. We had a big shakeup here. They got rid of everybody who'd been here for about 10 years. I got laid off. Did a bunch of other things, came back, did some freelance, actually worked in sales for a year. That was interesting, didn't make any money. Learned a lot about that end of the business. Left for a couple of years, and then I got a chance to do weekend weather. They called me up out of the blue and said, hey, need a weathercaster for the weekend. Heard you were looking to get back in the business. You want the job. And that was back in '95. I jumped at it, and I've been here ever since doing weather. But I already knew a lot about weather just because of the news angle, the news experience I'd had for so long. So again, whenever an opportunity arises in this business, you can't be afraid. It may not be exactly what you want to do. Jump at it, or at least consider it strongly. You never know where it might lead. See, I got a million stories. Let me know if there's anything special you want me to do.
Just do your thing. I'll move around and